Thrilled this morning to say that our keynote speaker is Australia's eSafety Commissioner. And in this role, she leads the world's first government agency committed to keeping its citizens safer online. She has extensive experience in the non-profit and government sectors. She spent 2 decades working in senior public policy and safety roles in the tech industry at Microsoft, Twitter, and Adobe. For example, at Microsoft, for 17 years, she served as one of the company's first and longest standing government relations professionals, ultimately in the role of Global Safety Director for Policy and Outreach. She was recently designated one of Australia's most influential women by the Australian Financial Review, a leading Australian in foreign affairs by the Sydney Morning Herald. Look, put it this way, reading her CV reminds me of that great Australian saying, pull your head in, pal. No one likes an overachiever. We'll happily take questions if we have time. Let's have a massive virtual welcome for our keynote speaker this morning, the eSafety Commissioner. Take it away, Julie Inman-Grant.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'll have you know that I don't have that same kind of influence in the household, which is a challenge with 3 kids, a husband, and a puppy. But it is very much a pleasure to speak to you today about my work as Australia's eSafety Commissioner, and also about the special challenges that COVID-19 has created for us. And I'm sure that for each of you, as Adam mentioned, the past 6 months have been just as challenging. Before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we all live and work. And I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. I have attended a few AusCERT conferences in my time, and of course the highlight for me was always the cocktail party. When I was a single gal at Microsoft, I used to say, hey, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. So anyway, I ended up marrying an accountant. And hasn't life changed? I mean, tonight, I guess I'll be drinking alone in my office with the door shut because I missed the opening plenary session. And I want to give my congratulations to Michelle and Rachel, who I understood took out some awards last night. So seriously, I'll leave the jokes to Adam from now on. I'm especially pleased to have the opportunity to talk to AusCERT because we in online safety have a lot to learn from the security community. And I'm constantly struck by the maturity of your profession, and in particular, the fact that security by design is now commonplace in most product and service assessments. Cyber safety and cybersecurity, while complementary, are also quite distinct. While all of you might conceptualize cybersecurity differently, I tend to think of it as the physical operation of the networks and computers over which the internet is delivered, and the technologies, systems, people, and processes surrounding it. By contrast, cyber safety concerns more of the emotional and psychological impact of what you see, read, and hear online. The personal rather than necessarily the economic online harms that people are increasingly experiencing every day. But I also see safety, security, and privacy as 3 legs of the same stool. If all 3 legs are not balanced, the stool will surely fall over. In my roles heading up safety, security, and privacy for Microsoft, for instance, safety was often treated as the poor cousin to its elder siblings. So we need to be thinking about where there are similarities, where there are differences, but how we can harness our work together because there are so many important interdependencies. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about eSafety's work to elevate safety up as a relative priority to security and privacy, and to promote a culture of safety by design. But first, for those of you who are not familiar with safety, let me bring you up to speed. Slide 2, please. We were established in 2015. eSafety is a regulator with a range of civil powers to compel the takedown of illegal or harmful content, whether it's pro-terrorist content, child sexual abuse material, image-based abuse, or serious cyberbullying directed at a child. Definitely barbecue-stopping conversations. To prevent such harms occurring in the first place as much as possible, eSafety has a huge focus on prevention through the provision of evidence-based resources and outreach programs to help Australians to have more positive and empowering online experiences. And I'm proud to say that in just 5 years, we've reached millions of Australians with our education resources and training, and have provided relief to thousands of victims of online abuse. Now, these kinds of services aren't available anywhere else in the world. Reaching parents is especially challenging but important. We often refer to them as the front line of defense. And our own research has found that 81% of Australian parents are giving their preschoolers access to the internet through an interconnected device, with 42% of Australian parents telling us they provide access to their children by the age of 2. Our outreach programs, webinars, live seminars, and other resources are also tailored to specific audiences to reach seniors, educators, frontline domestic violence workers, and a variety of at-risk communities. And this is where co-design is really important, where we're doing this with the communities rather than to the communities. And as an online safety regulator, we now have the equivalent of 6 reporting schemes, including 2 that are quite new, that all operate under a singular investigative division. Slide 3, please. Our world-first cyberbullying complaint scheme provides an invaluable safety net to Australian children affected by serious cyberbullying. So that's bullying that's seriously harassing, intimidating, humiliating, or threatening. And we know that 1 in 5 Australian children have experienced cyberbullying. The average age is 14, but going down. And that girls are bullied online more than boys. So for youth-based cyberbullying, the online abuse tends to be peer-to-peer and is an extension of bullying that's happening in the schoolyard. So today, we've received thousands of cyberbullying complaints. And these are often very complex and may feature what we call imposter or phoenixing, the phoenixing of accounts. This is a more recent phenomenon amongst young people. And by phoenixing, we mean that the renewal and rebirth of harassing accounts after they've been suspended for violations of the social platforms guidelines. Some of them often lie inert until one is taken down, then another one rises up in its place. In the industry, it's also known as abusive account recidivism. So about 15% of the complaints of youth-based cyberbullying involve direct threats of violence or harm, including telling young people to GKY or go kill yourself. You can only imagine the devastating impact on a young person who might already be struggling or vulnerable, what this impact might have. And this particularly holds true as protecting the mental health of our young people, particularly through the COVID-19 lockdown, has been extremely challenging. And to that end, we've seen a lot more bullying with a coronavirus flavor, like fake memorials to kids that have supposedly died from coronavirus and haven't, or telling a peer that they hope you get coronavirus and die. So there's more commentary about modeling good online and real life behavior, but I'll save that for another time. So despite the increasing nature and complexity of the complaints, our cyberbullying team does work diligently to make sure that we help the people involved and ensure the swift removal of offending content from the social media sites. We know that the quicker we get this harmful content directed at a child down, the more quickly we relieve them of the humiliation and emotional anguish this causes them. In so many of the cases where we pick up the phone and talk to the kids, we've sent about 12,000 kids onto Kids Helpline for mental health support, but we also end up going a step further by involving where the child wants, parents, school officials, so that we can make sure that we're tackling the social conflict at its core. And once that happens and the content's taken down, the cyberbullying does tend to stop. Slide 4, please. eSafety also provides a government-led reporting service for victims of image-based abuse. So Australians who have had their intimate images shared or threatened to be shared without their consent. And these also include deep fakes or photoshopped images. When I was announced as the eSafety commissioner, they said, "You're going to take on the revenge porn portal." And I said, "Revenge porn? There's no way in the world I'm going to call it that. Revenge for what? We don't want this to lead to victim blaming." But unfortunately, this has been one of the more fastest growing areas of our business. We know from 2017 that image-based abuse affects about 1 in 10 Australians. We've also seen subsequent research from RMIT and Monash that shows that that's on the rise, particularly as people are relying on digital intimacy tools during the lockdown if they're separated from their love interests. But since we opened the doors for this scheme in October 2017, we've helped almost 4,000 victims get their intimate images and videos taken down. We have about a 90% success rate in cases of removing these intimate images, sometimes up to 200 or 300 URLs per case from hundreds of overseas platforms. So from September 2018, we were given additional tools to tackle image-based abuse through a new civil penalty scheme, which allows us to tackle the perpetrators and the hosting sites through a range of tools, including warnings, infringement notices, and significant fines as well. And so this does give us significant new leverage in targeting the perpetrators and enablers of this heinous abuse. And there are also criminal statutes on the books in most states and territories. I think Tasmania is the current holdout. But it's really important to remember that many victims do not want to pursue criminal charges or litigation that simply resurfaces the humiliating material. You know, prosecutions may prove to be an expensive, drawn out, and painful exercise, and it's often by somebody that they know. So what victims generally want is for the content to be taken down. And we can do this sometimes in a matter of hours, but often within the course of a week. Overall, about 60% of our IBA reports involve women, with more than 1/3 of these under the age of 18. So it then becomes child sexual abuse material. Recently, 30% of our reports have including heartbreaking cases of sextortion or blackmail with the threat to share images or videos, targeting adolescents and often young men, including international university students. Slide 5, please. Our cyber report team works at the pointier end of the online harm spectrum, focused on disrupting online child sexual abuse material and dealing with other forms of illegal and harmful online content. For the past 20 years, the Australian government has been operating a prohibited online content scheme. Over the last 5 years, Cyber Report has been responding to reports from the public and law enforcement about prohibited or potentially prohibited online content. And we work with the law enforcement and our international partners to get this child sexual abuse material taken down. Last year, we had the highest level of investigations ever, 14,000 investigations into illegal online content. And over the life of our scheme, Australian industry has complied with 100% of our takedown notices. But in recent times, we've seen a sustained higher volume of child sexual abuse material being produced by children themselves, using smartphones, tablets, and other connected devices. Here at eSafety, we refer to this material as coerced rather than self-produced child sexual abuse content, as we observe that a significant proportion of these vulnerable children are often being groomed, manipulated, and intimidated by predatory adults into recording or live streaming these performances on demand. Our investigators are seeing videos of 6 or 7-year-olds performing sex acts on the camera on iPhones or iPads in the privacy of their bedrooms and bathrooms. And I can tell you that in some of these videos, we can hear the parents' voices in the next room calling them for dinner. So this is one of the reasons we really implore parents to have their kids using technology out in open areas of the house so that they can see what they're doing. I'm sure your mother told you when you were a teenager, nothing good happened behind closed doors. In any case, next slide, please. Over 99% of eSafety investigations were completed within 2 business days, and depending on the case, are notified to the AFP or to the InHope network. InHope, or the International Association of Internet Hotlines, is a global network of 46 hotlines in 42 countries dedicated to combating online child sexual abuse. Next slide, please. And here's how the process works. After assessing the material as child sexual abuse material, the team notified the URL to a shared management platform housed at Interpol. Content at the illegal URL is crawled and scraped, with images and hashes being ingested by the Interpol Child Sexual Exploitation Database to aid in victim identification efforts. At the same time, the URL is notified to the relevant hotline in the host jurisdiction for takedown according to its own local policies. Between 2017 and 2019, the number of CSAM-related images and videos processed by InHope almost doubled to more than 456,000. So by notifying InHope and leveraging this international network of partners, we're able to facilitate rapid takedown of content and law enforcement action where appropriate. While police focus on the victim identification and going after the perps, our focus at eSafety is on the removal of this harmful material from the internet, as well as also understanding the economic drivers and how to disrupt this kind of trade in images at scale. By achieving the harmful takedown of content, though, we're not only protecting Australians who may view this material from online harm, but we're also providing support for the child victims of this abuse, who can be traumatized and re-traumatized by this material, following them throughout their lives. And part of the trauma for survivors is a fear of being recognized by those who have viewed their abuse material. Justified. In a survey of child sexual abuse survivors in Canada, 20% of them had people approach them on the road and say, "Oh, I saw you in that pornographic series," as if they were willing participants in this. So the threat is very real. So all of this to say, we of course recognize that technology is rapidly changing the online landscape. So we constantly need to stay a step ahead. We also well understand that the internet is global and that we're never going to be able, as a small organization, to go to war with the internet, but that we need to join forces with other committed leaders in this space. And one of the ways we do this is by stepping up to take a role globally. So for instance, our head of investigations serves as the vice president of the InHope board so that we can modernize its operations and future-proof its efficacy as a network. Next slide, please. To that end, last year I joined the policy board of the We Protect Global Alliance with the likes of Interpol, Thorn, UNICEF, the European Commission, Microsoft, and other global leaders in combating online child sexual abuse. More than 100 countries and 70 companies and civil society organizations have joined the Alliance and are committed to making significant steps to work towards the eradication of child sexual abuse material. This slide I'm showing you here walks through what we call the Global Strategic Response, which I had the pleasure of launching in Addis Ababa in December. And it just illustrates how many different machinations have to be working together to really integrate our collective global efforts and collaborate across domains, functions, and specializations. So it takes legislative change, it takes victim support, it takes staying a step ahead in terms of technology, because we know that these challenges are complex. We also know the resourcefulness of online predators coupled with the resilience of their networks and the constantly shifting threat landscape and transnational character of the internet dictate this multi-pronged approach. So next slide, please. Another interesting global collaboration that demonstrates that it takes a network to fight a network explains why we joined the Project Arachnid project. And this is an amazing technological tool that was developed by the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, which is designed to reduce the availability of child sexual abuse images online, but also to help break the cycle of abuse experienced by survivors. The scale of what this crawler does is amazing. Thus far, it's scanned nearly 125 billion images on the clear web and has flagged nearly 22 million as new suspected images of child sexual abuse that were not known. Project Arachnid detects around 100,000 images related to CSAM that require further analyst assessment each month. So as part of the project, analysts from eSafety are daily helping to classify these images so that we can contribute to the international effort to build a comprehensive central database of hashes or digital fingerprints of known child sexual abuse material. But we also gain access to the Arachnid hash list API. And by comparing our own image hashes amongst those provided by Arachnid, then we're also able to reduce our investigators' exposure to the harmful content that they see every day. And as I'm sure you would agree, these investigators are precisely the kinds of heroes we've been talking about these past few days. So we absolutely need for their well-being. Slide 10, please. These regulatory roles sit alongside the new powers we were granted following the horrific attacks carried out last year in Christchurch. As you would well remember, the perpetrator of these attacks live streamed his actions and posted an abhorrent manifesto online as he sought to traumatize the community and radicalize other individuals. In the wake of all this, the federal parliament moved quickly to grant eSafety the power to issue content and hosting services with a notice about providing access to abhorrent violent content. Such material includes perpetrator-produced content showing violent terrorist acts leading to death or serious injury, murder, attempted murder, torture, rape, and kidnapping. Since the legislation was enacted in April, we've completed regulatory investigations into over 800 instances of AVM. The overwhelming majority of these claims has concerned the rape of children, which are dealt with through our online content scheme. And to date, we've issued about 20 AVM notices to content services and hosting services regarding 12 items of content. 10 of these items have since been removed from the internet. Next slide, please. 8 of the notices concerned material posted to the internet by the perpetrator of the Christchurch attacks. You may have seen soon after these attacks, Australia's major internet service providers, Vodafone, Optus, Telstra, TPG, Foxtel, and Vocus, voluntarily blocked access to 40 of the websites hosting the Christchurch attack videos or manifesto by the perpetrator, which I do think really did disrupt the ability for it to go more viral. And while they had a wonderful plan with a wonderful intention, they didn't think about what needed to be done to unblock. So we had some fairly extensive negotiations, and for the first time, we worked up an ISP protocol and ordered the ISPs to continue websites that continued hosting the material. We had worked with a number of the 40 sites, and some were just not willing to take it down. So I think it's worth noting that in order for us to invoke this extraordinary power, a live streamed event must be determined to have reached an online crisis event threshold, and that's a very, very high threshold. So with all the shootings, even the Hale situation on Twitch, none of them quite reached that threshold. Slide 12. Next slide, please. Earlier this year, I announced another protocol agreed to with the ISPs that will facilitate rapid removal of extreme terrorist or violent content if a similar crisis ever goes viral again. And I just want to make sure that we understand that there needs to be a balance and discretion when determining whether a site should be blocked or not. Australians place a very high value on free speech, but I also think the Australian community expects to be protected from material that is designed to traumatize vulnerable individuals, particularly children. And we saw this quite vividly last week with the suicide video that was live streamed on Facebook and lie dormant for about a week, but then went viral across multiple platforms, including TikTok, with the graphic and distressing video potentially being viewed by untold numbers of school children across Australia. So all of these decisions will need to be measured and made on a case-by-case basis to ensure that we maintain the safety of Australians while not over-blocking content on the internet. This is a balance and a responsibility I take really seriously. Next slide, please. Let me turn now to the extraordinary circumstances in which we now live, where there is so much more additional activity, whether it's education, business, social, or family interaction, that has shifted to the internet. You would assume that such a development would lead to a discernible rise in internet harms, and there you'd be spot on. The early period of COVID-19 lockdown accompanied a huge spike across eSafety's all of our reporting areas. And it won't be surprising to you that in the wake of COVID, with the entire world converging online, that we've seen a sustained surge around all forms of online abuse vis-a-vis the same period last year. As of August, we've seen a 129% increase in child sexual abuse material, a 63% increase in youth-based cyberbullying, and an 87% increase in adult cyber abuse, despite the fact that we do not have a legislative scheme for adults. Meanwhile, reports about image-based abuse rose by more than 245%. Some of this increase can be attributed to a current sextortion scam that's really been doing for about 2 years. But we saw a 600% spike Easter long weekend. There was a coordinated email scam that many of you may have received saying, we have your password and we've hacked into your webcams. Unless you pay us, make a Bitcoin payment, we'll share with your friends and colleagues. These are offshore scams that are being investigated at the moment. So I think, as well as the sheer volume of activity, I think you're also seeing the frustrations and the uncertainty and the doubt around COVID tending to surface some of the worst aspects of human behavior online. People stuck at home, denied traditional support networks such as fear family networks, have seen people tended to lash out online. Now, this is both understandable but highly regrettable. We've also seen a number of coordinated, what we call volumetric attacks, some by anti-vaxxers, some by conspiracy theorists, but others by white supremacists and extremists that are targeting specific individuals with avalanches of online hate that come just under the threshold of the platform's terms of use. But the impact in terms of the cumulative effect of the harm is the same. And we've likened it to swatting individual bees in the midst of a swarm. So we are in discussions with all the platforms about what tools they're using to detect, thwart, and prevent these kind of attacks happening at scale. I think, as you've also seen, they're all struggling to keep up with the increased harmful content on their sites, particularly as content moderators have had to go home. You know, of course, you would know AI only and natural language processing only goes so far to surface online abuse. Human moderation is required in the vast majority of reports that they look at. So our research focus obviously shifted during COVID so that we could really understand what was happening here. And we were disturbed to find that 40% of Australians had a negative experience online during the first few months of the pandemic. And despite this, Australians did view the internet utility during the COVID-19 lockdown, particularly for paying bills and banking, accessing news and information, and of course, staying in touch with friends. And I think we'll see different trends in terms of how we work, how we communicate. And we're also expecting a new normal in terms of the elevated threats of abuse that we're seeing online. So while we can't live without the internet, we have to learn to live with it, and we hope in a more civil and safe way. And it's partly what feeds my confidence that within the next few years that there will be an international network of regulators like the eSafety Office. Ireland's next, the UK, but we do need a network to be able to take on the social media networks at scale. Slide 14, please. As I mentioned at the outset, with privacy and security, the features of online products that protect users' interests are designed into those products from the inception. I was an agitator within the companies for a long time for safety to be a higher priority and assume commensurate status. At that, I failed. So I'm trying, I guess, from the poacher term gamekeeper perspective, to try and encourage safety by design, because I do believe we need to shift the responsibility back onto this tech sector to create a safer and more civil internet. So using your language to lessen the threat surface by better policing what is happening on their networks, by building protections in at the front end rather than belting them on in response to a revenue, reputational, or regulatory threat. And we want, again, having worked for so long in the industry, I know this is not something we're going to regulate our way out of or be prescriptive around. To work with the industry rather than do this to the industry. So in 2018, we worked with industry and civil society to develop a set of safety by design principles the major platforms have all agreed to. And we're currently in the process, next slide, of developing 2 dynamic self-assessment tools that will help the companies. Well, obviously there's one for startups and another that's geared for more mature companies to help them effectively implement safety by design. And as you can see from this, it has 5 different modules. It starts with leadership and governance, but will also be weighted according to the specific needs of the platform and what other systems and processes and policies they have in place, but we'll surface up best practice so that particularly new and mid-tier companies don't have to start from scratch. And we're working with the investor and VC communities to make sure that they're encouraged through safety by design as well. So in conclusion, I want to thank you for tuning in and for listening to me drone on about the few areas that may be a little bit outside your direct wheelhouse. Last slide, please. You can learn more about everything I've talked about by visiting esafety.gov.au. I confidently believe that you'll find it one of the most accessible online safety hubs in the world. And one of the things I made sure of when I came across from the tech sector to government was that eSafety's own technology resources would be forward-leaning and innovative. So when we relaunched our website last October, we had some great reviews and including a Webby Honoree Award, but we want to make it accessible and navigable for everyone. But in closing, let me pick up on the theme of AusCERT2020, We Can Be Heroes, and give you some thoughts about what this means as far as online safety is concerned. Well, certainly, I imagine a number of you are parents, and we should always be the guides for our children as they commence their internet journey. And we should strive to be just as involved in our kids' everyday lives as in their online lives, the way that we are their everyday lives. And as I often say, parental controls are fine, but a parental presence is much better. And we can all be heroes on social media too, where so much of the worst of humanity, including misogyny, racism, and prejudice, seems to rise to the surface. By modeling this responsible civil behavior on social media, including when we are having a disagreement, we can inspire those around us to live up to the same standards and to fight fair online. And instead of being mute bystanders, we can also be upstanders and call out the vicious cyber abuse that is increasingly poisoning our social media feeds, and report to the social media sites, and should you need to the eSafety office. And finally, since we are all professionals working in or around the tech sector, can I ask you to check out our Safety by Design resources and to become ambassadors for this concept as you move amongst your professional networks or even within your own organizations? I'm sure you'll agree that it's an idea whose time has come. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Julie. A profound and amazing presentation, certainly not droning on. Some massive issues that you covered there. There's a string of questions that come through. I'll sort of amalgamate them into 3 questions. First of all, the personal toll for people like yourself and the people who view and review and remove this sort of material. How do you find, as the mother of 3 young kids yourself, the will to keep going on and dealing with this stuff that must be at times horrible to encounter?
Well, I think sometimes it's precisely the fact that I do have kids and that I do know the horrors that propel us all all on. I mean, yeah, we see terrible things every day. And so, and we actually see the worst of humanity. But again, I think that inspires us and it spurs us on to do more. I think we all recognize that we need to help people and to change the way the current online world is. And that's a responsibility we all take seriously. And you know what's been really challenging is coming from the tech sector where there is no hierarchy and you move fast and break things, and coming into the public service, which tends to be much more structured and Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, even though online harms take place at all 24/7, 7 days a week, is trying to pivot the organization to stay a step ahead and think about how technologies might be misused or harnessed for the future. So we're a different kind of organization. Some of our investigators have been with us 10 years. Typically, particularly in police forces, you would only have people viewing child sexual abuse materials sitting in those roles for 6 months. So as a result, we've invested a lot in the technology to make sure that we are masking what our investigators have to see, but we have psychologists coming in and an extensive well-being program. In fact, we also make them, well, they have to do other things like play Tetris. So certain video games have been shown to keep these images from lodging into their long-term memories. And so we use a range of different ways to do that.
That's fascinating. That's a discussion within itself. Just quickly, someone asks, as someone who manages an internet connection servicing many schools, what's the most important thing that needs to be in place to minimize the risk of e-abuse, either within schools or what about at home as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think of homes and parents as the front line of defense. The minute we're handing over a digital device, we should be, in an age-appropriate way. And this is what the eSafety Parents Guide does. It provides guidance. We now have a program for parents of under 5s. And the messages there are, to be safe, to be kind, to ask for help and make good decisions. But we need to be talking to our kids about respect and responsibility. This is a privilege and not a right that you have technology. Setting limitations up front is really, really important. I can tell you, I've got 8-year-old twins and a 14-year-old. If you don't set the limitations up front, it's very difficult to ratchet that back when they're teenagers. And also, I think as we saw with this suicide video going viral last week, when we talk to schools, we often talk to them about the 4 R's of the digital age: respect, responsibility, building digital resilience, as well as critical reasoning skills. And because we have a fragmented education system with the states and territories and the Catholics, independents, and public schools, we don't see online safety education or digital citizenship taught consistently throughout a child's educational experience. If we're going to give them the tools to teach them to be on technology, we also need to teach them how to navigate it as well. And we've worked with the schools to develop a toolkit for schools. It was an 18-month project, but that's also on our website, and we've got tons of resources for educators as well. But it's everything from policies, how do you deal with an explicit incident when it happens?
Final question. You pointed to the issue of getting big tech on side here. I won't get you to make... I've heard some comments online saying big tech are just horribly slow and in denial about this. Others have said it's complicated. Could you answer me this? In terms of trying to get big tech to do considerably more, is the technology, et cetera, already there and there's just a resistance to using it? Or is it just an incredibly complicated issue and one they're not engaging in sufficiently? If we wanted, is there some serious low-hanging fruit that big tech could grab now to significantly reduce the incidence of this sort of material?
Yeah, I think the answer to your question is both. It is extremely complicated. It's an online arms race, and we've got to remember that this is human behavior and the worst of human behavior playing out online, and the platforms are being used to weaponize this behavior. But the harms are well known. They've been documented for a long time. the platforms know how their tools have been weaponized. And my view is some are doing it better than others, but it's really about priorities and it's about leadership. They have vast financial resources. You know, the big tech is just printing money. They have intellectual capability. They have access to build, you know, the most extensive tools, and they're employing them to a certain degree. But it's like you're never going to eradicate crime in the real world. You're never going to eradicate online abuse, but we certainly could be doing a better job. And this is why I'm so firmly behind the concept of safety by design and having the platforms take responsibility, just like we expect when we get into our cars. In the 1970s, there weren't laws requiring seatbelts and there weren't airbags yet, but now they're governed by international standards and you expect those seatbelts to work. Now the companies need to be adding virtual seatbelts and other protective mechanisms at the front end to mitigate against these risks rather than bolting it on after the damage has been done. It is a case of will.
In closing, let me just echo something from Chris that's been upvoted by many people. Great presentation, not a question, but just a comment to say thank you for all that you and everyone that works in this space does to keep our kids safe. #real heroes. On behalf of everyone at AusCERT2020, Julie, thank you so much and keep up the fantastic work.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you, everyone. Have a great conference.
Australia's eSafety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant there, ladies and gentlemen.